Rick Thompson, thank you very much for that. And with me on the program now, Labor MP Nick Champion and also the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Josh Frydenberg, first to you. Alcoa in the end was essentially just a victim of global pressures, wasn't it?
Well, firstly, our thoughts go out to those many families who are feeling it very tough at the moment after this news from Alcoa, and it comes after news from Qantas and, of course, from Ford and Toyota in Victoria. And Victoria is responsible, Kieran, for about 30% of the nation's manufacturing, so we're really feeling it here in my home state. You're right that there were a number of factors at play with Alcoa. Particularly, there was excess supply coming on the market of aluminium from countries in the Middle East and particularly from China because they can source lower cost energy. It's interesting to note that if you look back, 40 years, it was three countries: the United States, Japan, and then Soviet Union, who were responsible for making more than 60% of the world's aluminium. That has completely changed now, and the majority of aluminium produced in the world is coming out of China. So that was a factor. But another factor was the price of energy in this country, because this is a very highly intensive energy process. And under the Labor government's own Treasury modelling, Kieran, it found that the aluminium production in Australia would go down by about 60% as a result of the carbon tax. So that's the Labor Party's own Treasury modelling saying that the carbon tax was at the heart of the reduction in aluminium production in Australia.
The company hasn't. The company's been very keen to point out that the carbon tax wasn't a driving factor in this. Is the coalition clutching at straws to say it is when the company itself has said no?
Absolutely not. It is one of the factors. The cost of doing business in Australia has gone up because of the carbon tax. You just have to face that reality. And because aluminium production is such a high energy intensive process, the carbon tax is feeding into those increased prices.
All right,
so
let's go
there are a number of factors at play, but that's
Nick
one
Champion,
of them.
is it time for your colleagues to have a rethink on this now and just allow the government to get rid of the carbon tax? Because every time there is a job lost, as you heard there, and Josh was pointing to that Treasury modelling as well, that you get the blame for it.
Well, look, Josh, has fallen back on the government's old favourites, point the finger at unions, point the finger at the previous government, point the finger at workers. That tends to be their MO. They're all blame and no responsibility. And it's one thing to lose your job, and it's a pretty tragic thing to have to go through, and pretty traumatic thing to have to go through. But what you want to is have some confidence that you might be able to find a job in the future. And the problem with these jobs at Alcoa is that they're preceding a pretty savage time for manufacturing across South Australia and Victoria. And what we'll find is these are just a sort of a curtain raiser, tragically, to the some 25,000 automotive component jobs, which directly were related to Toyota and Holden. And it was why making sure production continued at Holden was so important. What we're now seeing is the collapse of an entire manufacturing ecosystem, and what we have from the government is, in the first initial thing, they're full of blame, and they've got an industry policy, a jobs policy, which consists of a single $16 million grant to Cadbury's in Tasmania. So,
no, okay, well, let's
move on.
I want to play you a little bit of what. I want to play you a little of what the Treasurer said on the Richo and Jones program last night, pointing out that at any one time there are 140,000 jobs being advertised in Australia, and he went on to say this.
Been enormous job growth in health and social services, in IT and construction. There's been an enormous number of jobs. A lot of the skills that a lot of the Alcoa workers had would be able to go into some other industries.
I'm a fitter on the line at Holden or Toyota. Yeah. I'm not going to get one of those jobs.
Well, you could get jobs in the construction industry, or, importantly, you can get opportunities for retraining into some industries as well.
Nick Champion, is it the reality that Australia simply has to get its head around the fact that we have to focus on our strengths, as everyone puts it, on the high-end, value-added manufacturing, not the sort of thing that we've seen, sadly, in your electorate, with Holden announcing it's shutting down, but now Alcoa, Toyota before it, that this is simply the way of the world, with the high input costs and so on of doing business, and that old school manufacturing in this country?
Well, look, Kieran, even if you say that, and I disagree with it, we had a very highly sophisticated factory in my electorate which made cars and made them very successfully. What it needed was co-investment with the government. But even if you say, you know, as a nation we want to get out of the car industry and into high-tech manufacturing, you still have to actually retrain workers to do it, and you still have to have a jobs plan to do it. And what we see is neither from this government. We don't see, I can tell you, you know, I'm on ground zero on this. I don't see much urgency or action by the government to actually put in place those plans, those retraining plans, those economic transition plans. And in my local paper today, I've given them a bit of a hand by indicating what they can do. But we don't see any urgency from this government at all. What we see is them coming on shows like this and blaming everybody else.
Josh, the government is talking about retraining, and as you heard there from the Treasurer pointing out other industries, but collectively in Geelong we're talking around, and I'll go back to Geelong because of the impact of the Port Henry smelter, but we're talking around 2,000 jobs in Geelong collectively impacted by recent announcements. It's an enormous challenge ahead for that city alone, isn't it? When and how do you go about the retraining?
Well, you're absolutely right. This is an enormous challenge, and it's going to involve local government, state government and the federal government all working cooperatively together to identify new training and job opportunities. And Joe Hockey's absolutely right. There are other opportunities in the economy for people who are going through these difficult times. And he mentioned the construction industry. Now, if the Labor Party would stand aside and allow the Building and Construction Commission to come back into practice, that would produce another $6 billion productivity dividend for the economy, as it did when it was in place during the Howard years. If they would get rid of the carbon tax and the mining tax, then that would remove some of the sovereign risk which is deterring innovation and investment in this country. If they would let us pass all our legislation to get rid of regulation, particularly around red and green tape and environmental approvals which have been slowed down, that would help us create more jobs. In fact, Greg Hunt, since becoming the Environment Minister in just a few months, Kieran, has approved more than $400 billion worth of
but Josh,
investment.
you talk about the carbon tax. These companies are making decisions, though, Josh Frydenberg, in the knowledge that the carbon tax is more than likely going to go as of July 1 anyway. These are all happening despite that. And yet the government keeps pointing to it.
Well, the fact is the Labor Party had been in government for nearly 6 years, and on their watch you saw the closure of Mitsubishi, you saw Toyota go public with its concerns about industrial relations, you heard about the concerns of the carbon tax. So, you know, you can't differentiate the experience of the Labor Party and the impact of their policies on some of these business decisions that have been taken now. But what we're concerned about is the future, Kieran. What we're concerned is about creating those hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We believe we've got the policy and we've got the plan for it.
We've got to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back with Josh Frydenberg and Nick Champion. This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me this morning, Josh Frydenberg and Nick Champion. Gentlemen, I want to look now to the violence on Manus Island in the last few days. I've received a statement this morning from the Immigration Minister. He says, I'm advised that the evening passed without incident on Manus Island, with staff proactively managing the centre overnight to ensure that conditions remain calm. Any updates will be provided as necessary. That from Scott Morrison this morning. So thankfully, Josh Frydenberg, some calm overnight, but a tragedy the night before. One individual lost his life, an Iranian national. Isn't it inevitable that, given the circumstances at that facility, that this sort of violence is inevitable to happen again?
Well, no, violence is not inevitable, and you know it's very important that all those people there on the island, behave in accordance with proper processes and legal procedures. Look, it's extremely regrettable what happened. It's good that there has been some calm overnight. The Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has spoken to his counterpart in Papua New Guinea, Peter O'Neill. Peter O'Neill has reaffirmed his country's commitment to the offshore processing at Manus, and that's a very important part, Kieran, of our three-pronged strategy to effectively stop the boats, and we make no apologies for the tough measures.
But I suppose
that
the
we have
point
taken.
is, Josh, the question I asked, though, I suppose goes to the fact that the group of people concerned, nearly 1,400 of them, are in limbo at the moment. And when you've got that sort of mix, people that want asylum, seeking asylum, they've come from, in many occasions, very difficult countries in the first place. Isn't that just a recipe for more tension and likely violence?
Well, of course there's going to be that agitation and tension, because these people were sold a policy by the people smugglers that they said would, deliver them to Australia, or a product that they were sold by the people smugglers, and it hasn't delivered them to Australia. So they may have given up to $10,000 of their hard-earned incomes to try to get to Australia, and that's not happening because of the Abbott government's policies. So of course there's going to be this level of disquiet. We're going to provide the reinforcements necessary if that is required to help keep peace at Manus. But this is not an easy issue to deal with. If it was such an easy issue to deal with, I suppose the Labor Party would have fixed it, but they didn't have the will to deal with it, Kieran, and we saw a complete breakdown in their policy as a result.
Labor does say this is their policy, the PNG deal, and Nick Champion, I suppose that's the question to you, that Labor and the coalition, regardless of who was in power, this was the plan, the PNG deal, the Manus Island facility. So this violence, this unrest, it would have most likely happened anyway under Labor. Isn't it a bit rich for Richard Marles and others in Labor to be criticising Scott Morrison now, given it was a Labor plan?
Well, Kieran, there were, of course, riots in detention centres before, as far back as 2001 when John Howard was Prime Minister. But this is the first time that I can remember anybody dying in one of those riots. And given there has been a death, and given there is a general lack of transparency over the government's border protection operations, they won't tell us anything, they won't tell the Australian public anything, and they won't tell the Australian media anything. It's appropriate that there be a judicial inquiry into this. By the government's own logic, they set up a judicial inquiry into the Pink Bats insulation scheme where there was deaths. By the government's own logic, they should set up a judicial inquiry into this matter so that we know exactly what went on and what could have been done, or maybe not could have been done, to prevent it.
Nick Champion, Josh Frydenberg, gentlemen, as always, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
I'm going to turn our attention now to the presentation posthumously yesterday of the Victoria Cross to Corporal Cameron Baird. It was